Hi there, my name's Damien Le-Hoste and I'm 43 from London. I really wanted to sit down and record this video. I have had a number of false starts in trying to build up the courage to share my story. It's not an easy thing to do. I'm not particularly comfortable in front of the camera, but I felt it was important. There has been a virtual audio boom in content creators on YouTube, Jehovah's Witness content creators, obviously chief amongst those, the indefatigable Lloyd Evans with his tireless campaigning to bring the Christian congregation of Jehovah's Witnesses, or whatever they're called now, to account for their mishandling of historical child sex abuse. And there's a lot of great young ex-Jehovah's Witness content creators speaking to their truth, and I've been really encouraged to do the same. Through a gay lens, I am gay, and I think that is a very particular cognitive dissonance that you're having to kind of navigate as a Jehovah's Witness. So I really wanted to speak to that and offer encouragement and to support to any young or old gay Jehovah's Witnesses. There's so much that you're told to do in order to keep in Jehovah's favour. If you have these feelings, I really just want to say, first of all, what you're told is batshit crazy, and second of all, life can be really beautiful, and I think that's the thing that's like the overriding thing that I really want to get across in this video. How amazing and beautiful the world is, and how amazing and beautiful life is. If you just take that leap of faith and allow yourself to live that beautiful life. So that's like the most important thing that I want to get across. I think the second most important reason for wanting to record this video, I left the truth some time ago in the early 2000s, and I don't think I really woke up until probably 10 years ago. I think in some ways I was probably mentally in up until 10 years ago. And what I've discovered is that the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society, or the Christian congregation of Jehovah's Witnesses, whatever, are bad actors. And it's vitally important now to shine a light on that, speak of the experience, and work in support of people waking up, because it is a really dangerous, divisive cult. So that's why I'm here. I'm not particularly comfortable in front of the camera, and I have a tendency to ramble. I am an older gentleman, so I've kind of formatted this like an interview, I guess, for want of a better word. So I wasn't born in the truth, but I came into the truth with my mother. She started studying with witnesses around 1987. Kind of coincided with my father's death. He was murdered in 1987, so it was a really dark time for our family. I think when she received that knock at the door, it was like much needed comfort that she was looking for, and it really resonated, I guess, at that time. But put a pin in that, because my mum actually had prior experiences with Witness as a teenager. She'd studied with them, so I guess some of the indoctrination had kind of started in earnest then. They came back and finished the job. So yeah, she started studying about 1987, and I'm one of 3 children. Well, there's 4 of us, but my younger sister came later on. Myself and my sister and my brother, we accompanied my mum to the meetings. My older brother didn't vibe with it a lot. I have a literal horse in my throat. I'm really sorry. Yet my older brother didn't vibe with the truth at all. He was 5 years older than me at the time. I was 8 years old. No, I was 9 years old. And I guess he had a little bit more agency to make decisions around what he wanted to do and didn't want to do, and he definitely didn't want to go along with the truth, and he didn't. So it ended up being just me and my younger sister. So Mum got baptised in 1989, and yeah, from that point on, we were bona fide Jehovah's Witnesses. 3 meetings a week, Tuesday, Thursday and Sunday. Excruciatingly boring on Sundays. I always remember, I have narcolepsy anyway. I think I've always had it. It was definitely identifiable when I was a 9-year-old child. I'd sleep in the meetings, always get a dig in my ribs from my mum. Yeah, excruciatingly boring, I remember that vividly. Yeah, so that was how I became a Jehovah's Witness. I can't really remember when I made the truth my own. I guess I put it to the back of my mind. I guess there was probably a point around 13, 14 where I kind of took it a bit more seriously. You know, when you progress from my book of Bible stories to the Young People Ask book, there must have been a point where I kind of lent into it a little bit more, and I was like, yeah, I think I need to do this. And I guess, you know, when it's all that you know, and it's all that your friends know, it becomes easier. You don't feel so different to everybody else. After Mum got baptised, like, we didn't celebrate Christmas and birthdays and all that stuff, and there was obviously at school birthdays and Christmas that you're kind of very separated from. But kind of getting into like the early teens, I think I lent into it. I got baptised eventually when I was 16. I remember the decision to get baptised was quite a profound one. I mean, I wasn't particularly doctrinally knowledgeable. I think I've always had some sort of latent kind of dyslexia, always been challenged with retaining knowledge to a certain extent, and I guess it was pretty bad when I was adolescent. So I didn't have a lot of knowledge, but I knew that I wanted to do it, and primarily it was just to make my mother proud. You know, I'd seen her go through a lot, and I really just wanted to give her joy, and she definitely wanted me to do it, and yeah, it kind of made me just want to make her happy. So yeah, at 16 I was baptised, and I was in my last year at secondary school. I became a very precocious little twat, basically, preaching at lunchtime with other students, counting the hours, because I wanted to pioneer when I left school, obviously. And when I did leave school, with very few GCSEs, can't remember exactly how many I got, I went straight into pioneering. I dove headlong into it. I had a cleaning job, typical Jehovah's Witness after school work. And yeah, I dove into auxiliary pioneering from 16 to 18, I think. 2 years, on and off. So yeah. If I'm honest, life was great. You know, at 16, baptised, around about this time Mum met a beautiful man, Albert. She met him on a bus. He was a bus driver. And I guess there was a kind of like a suggestion of courtship, but she knew that she wouldn't get married to somebody who wasn't a Jehovah's Witness. So she ended up preaching to him, and then he made the truth his own, ended up getting baptised, and they got married. And at that point we moved to Leighton, East London. He had a granddaughter, so it was me and my sister. My brother had moved out at that point. He was about 21, I think. And yeah, it was us three kids, my mum and my stepdad Albert, almost a nuclear family. And it was great, life was really great. When we lived in Bethnal Green in East London, I was quite a insular, shy kid. I didn't have many friends in the congregation, but then when I moved to Leighton, I had an abundance of friends. There were a lot of younger people in the congregation. And yeah, life was great. This is around, I guess, 1993, 93. I could see my trajectory to ministerial servant quite clearly. At that time I was way too young, but you know, there were a lot of inspiring characters in the congregation that I spent a lot of time with, who kind of took me under their wing. And yeah, at the time it was great. It was really, really good memory, if I'm perfectly honest. But adolescence is cray, and it's a really, really tough moment. It's a tough spot to be in, especially when you're in a high control group. I think I knew that I was gay all of this time, but there is a very particular kind of cognitive dissonance that you go through when you're a gay Jehovah's Witness, when everything is oppositional to who you are and the person who you're becoming. It's really, really tough when everybody appears to be normal and you're the only one in the room who isn't. Yeah, that's really, really profoundly tough, especially for somebody who doesn't have the wherewithal to be able to navigate that safely, and when you're not being given the right tools to manage it and to understand yourself, just on a basic level, it's tough. So I did what any other Jehovah's Witness would do in the same situation. I put it to the back of my head and I didn't deal with it, and I carried on regardless. And you know, I think it's only now that I understand how destructive that was. I can remember very clearly saying to myself around about this time that I would rather die than tell my mum and my stepdad that I was gay. Can you imagine that? Literally, I would rather die, and it was a very real thought trail, that I would rather not be here than disappoint my mum and stepdad. And yeah, that was the reality of it. On the surface, I was just brother Le-Hoste, but underneath, it was awful. Really, really, really bad. I learned to be a really good actor. Yeah. I learned to hide myself in plain sight. That became my talent, actually. You know, I had to convince everybody that I wasn't who I was. And I think in some ways, as I got older, there were parts of my personality that perhaps kind of gave little kind of unspoken cues as to my orientation, I guess. And I think you become quite attuned to people's subtle probing, these kind of thinly veiled questions around the way you're dressed, decisions that you've made for like your secular clothing. And I became very attuned at kind of batting away any suggestion that I might be homosexual. And you become quite clever with the retorts or deflection skills. I think I turned a blind eye at deflecting any kind of assumption or question around orientation. I can remember a kind of very awkward conversation with my mother where she just point blank asked me, "Are you homosexual?" And I don't know how I did it, but I managed to construct it in such a way that I think she was suitably convinced and relaxed. There was a level of kind of honesty from my part. I remember saying that I'd thought about it, but it's not really for me. And that was enough for Mum at that time. Obviously, she pulled out the Young People Ask book, and we went through the chapter dealing with homosexuality, and I made a valiant effort to show that I was paying attention, and yes, absolutely, you know. That's another thing about the organisation or the cult. There is a sense that, you know, don't mess around, do as you're told, and listen. And I can actually remember, this is going back years before, I remember being in a Tuesday book study, and there were sisters talking about a young brother, a young guy, who had been disfellowshipped and apparently had contracted AIDS and died. I remember this conversation in the book study because he was homosexual, and it always stuck with me. That was in the new congregation, in the Leighton congregation. It stuck with me, that attitude, and I was able to use that just to keep myself in line, because I'd made a pact to myself that I'd never be spoken about that in my absence, that I'd never be somebody, I would never be that guy in the anecdote, this throwaway anecdote. I'd never be that. But this is what the organisation does. It creates this kind of fallacy around which, if you're different, or if you have any suggestion of circumventing the rules, you'll just be reduced to some throwaway anecdote, and you will be thrown away. So anyway, I definitely, by the time I got to my late teens, I had definitely mastered the art of hiding. I became a bona fide bro. I befriended loads of guys from Essex and Wellingborough City and St Albans, and yeah, we kind of built a bros fraternity, and I became very good at it. I'd drink till I passed out. I could, you know, play with them in that same way. I could speak to them in their register. I listened to the same music as them, legitimately. There were legitimate bonds that I'd built with these guys, but you know, there was always this kind of sense that I was different, and there was a finite amount of time that I'd be able to continue with the pretense, especially as I got older, and especially as my sexuality became more manifest. See, that's the thing about the Jehovah's Witness organisation, the assumption that it's so easy just to hide yourself away, to park how you really feel, just dive into scripture to help deal with any errant thoughts. The reality is that it's impossible. It's an impossibility. There was a young brother in the congregation who, you know, I guess at the time I didn't have the language to call it what it was, but you know, now in retrospect, I know that was my first experience of love. And I think it was love at first sight. I walked into this congregation and I saw this boy, and I just decided that I wanted to be friends with him, and we became fast friends. And over that summer, this is probably the summer of 1995, I fell in love with this boy. And for me, it was a beautiful experience. It was unrequited love. It wasn't reciprocated, but it was an intense relationship. I have never had a relationship since that. And I guess obviously teenage relationships are so heightened anyway, but this relationship was formative. Formative now, looking back, because I can see how, the talents of the organisation had really, really gotten into me and put me through a blender, really, emotionally, because the way I was feeling towards him was so abhorrent in my head at that time. But looking back, there were so many kind of isolated moments that were just so beautiful, really. A vision of falling in love. And I just wish, not with regret, but I have a wish that I could do it again, but do it the right way. So yeah, that was a really good relationship. Obviously we're not friends now. I did try to reach out to him maybe 2 years ago on Facebook. We were probably friends until our early 20s. We kind of spoke and didn't, and communicated intermittently on social media. I reached out to him on Facebook a couple of years ago, sent him a message, kind of breezy message, how you doing, how's your family? And he sent a message back, and reading it was like he was in the other room. There's such a familiarity there. And then I went to write a response to him and he'd blocked me. I think you can actually call that ghosting. He legit ghosted me. I hadn't seen him in about 16 years maybe. And for a while it kind of burnt me, that thought. Because obviously he knows that I'm gay now. But it burnt me, that thought, that idea that the friend that he had back then is somehow changed by the person I am now. Anyway, I moved on from that. But yeah, that was a really amazing, beautiful memory, albeit kind of tinged with, the rhetoric of a high control group. If I'm honest, I've thought about it recently, and I think that, and this kind of goes back to the idea that I have that the idea that I had that I only woke up 10 years ago, that I think that I would have stayed in the truth if this one episode didn't happen. So basically my stepdad became a really strong Jehovah's Witness, an inspiration to a certain extent. Really diligent, really proactive, and after a few years he worked up towards being a ministerial servant, so he was kind of heading up towards being an elder. He really wanted that. But one day he came home from work, ran to the toilet, and he'd passed a lot of blood into the toilet. If you put a pin in that, 6 years prior he'd had diverticular disease, polyps in his bowel, if I remember correctly, that burst, and it was like he was hemorrhaging. He lost a lot of blood, so it was a really, really dodgy situation, because he needed a blood transfusion, and obviously he didn't take it. but the diverticular disease had corrected itself over time. He was down for about 6 months, I think, after that event, and he went back to health. But then, fast forward 6 years later, came home from work, went to the toilet. I remember him calling my mum downstairs and feeling that something was off, just in the way that he called her. And then shortly after, they went to the hospital, and he was in hospital for a couple of days. They were running tests. It was the same thing, but they didn't have an awareness of how bad the situation had got with this diverticular disease. I remember going to see him on the Thursday in the hospital, and he was in good spirits. He was sat in bed talking. Then I went back to see him on the Saturday. I was on my way to a festival, and just before I left, I went to see him in hospital, and again he was still fine. My sister, by this time my mum had her fourth child, my youngest sister. My youngest sister was with my mum at the hospital. So I went off to Garden City to this festival, and this is back in the days where I had brick mobile phones that you didn't take anywhere because they were that heavy. And I remember I gave one more call before I turned it off to go into the festival, and he was fine. This was like I call it a festival. It was actually an overnight rave. It was overnight, and I'd left my mobile phone in my friend's car, so we kind of headed back to the car about 6 in the morning, and I had like 4 missed calls. My mum had just left a message saying me to call her as soon as I got the message, and basically in the afternoon, that Saturday afternoon, he'd gone to the toilet and collapsed in the toilet and was rushed into emergency surgery. They'd removed his bowel and his small intestine, and he'd lost a massive amount of blood, and he desperately needed a blood transfusion, but he'd signed paperwork before he'd gone into surgery. He had a blood card, and he didn't take the blood, and he was dead by the Sunday afternoon. And again, it was another really dark moment for our family, really horrendous. He'd left a 4-year-old child. My mum had lost a second husband. It was just awful, really awful moment. And I'm about 22, nearly 22. And I guess after he died, I just figured, why am I doing it? Why am I doing it? I was actually asking those questions. I actually allowed myself to facilitate the inquiry into why I was doing it. It's almost as though his death wasn't out. And yeah, after maybe about a year after he died, my mum ended up moving out of London, moving to Essex. I stayed in London, and I just took that as my opportunity to go explore, to go find out what it was all about, really. I can remember my last meeting. It must have been, I guess, 2000. I had gone to a memorial and a couple of circuit assemblies after that. So I guess my last meeting really would have been around about 2002, 2003. Went to the Twickenham Circuit Assembly, District Convention rather. That was my last meeting, but I felt like I just didn't feel like I was part of it. At that point, I'd distanced myself from it because I knew I was too far gone at that point. And I'd already, by 2003, I'd definitely start sexually experimenting. I definitely started exploring my sexuality. And I hadn't been struck by lightning, and life wasn't inordinately difficult or complicated. And the people in the world that I encountered weren't horrible or mean. I made legitimate, genuine friendships that I have to this day. So yeah, if my stepdad didn't die, I think there's a good chance that I would have found a way just to suppress how I felt and continued on. I'm fairly convinced of that, because I think the indoctrination was such that I would have done anything to keep my mum and stepdad happy, keep them proud of me. So I'm 22 now, pretty much disassociated. I've got some friends who are witnesses still, and they're kind of low-key friends at this point, because I mean the circle that I moved in had some kind of low-key, kind of disassociated friends, so I was able to kind of keep some sort of connection with them when I kind of started to move away. And then in the dark corner, I'm kind of experimenting sexually, not telling anybody anything. And the profound thing about that moment is having to navigate the shame in who you are. You've got this freedom, you've got this abundance of freedom all of a sudden, and it's almost as though you don't really know what to do with it. So you just do everything, literally everything. And the profound shame because of what you've been told all of your life up until this point. I'm not ashamed to say it, and I can speak openly about it. It led me into going into parks and going home with strange men, which was a bit of a dark moment, because I really wish that I had more confidence not to do that. I don't know, maybe I don't think that, because it's all part of my rite of passage, really, in exploring myself. But it was definitely a dangerous situation to put myself in. So anyway, I'm kind of a covert, undercover homosexual. None of my friends really know about it. I ended up confiding in one friend, and she ended up outing me to all of these so-called friends. And at that point, they officially shunned me, because that was like the final straw. It was fine for me to kind of be disassociated. I could probably have had a girlfriend, but being gay, definitely not. And yeah, they shunned me. I remember at the time, I was having this kind of protracted conversation with one of these guys, and he was saying like the meanest things to me, really horrible things. And it just kind of, strengthened my shame, and this kind of sense that I was dirty. And yeah, there's parts of that I think, even to a certain extent now, that still kind of remain. It does psychic damage, that, when you're told by somebody you love, a really close friend, that you're not a good person, or you're not bad. So the person that they knew effectively isn't the person who is stood before them now. It's a really complex kind of idea system that's imparted on Christians in the Jehovah's Witness organisation. So yeah, I lost all of these friends, and that was a really traumatic moment. That was a really, really dark moment, because I'd known them for, at that point, I'd known them for about 10 to 15 years. And to have lost them was really, really hard. Actually, not 10, 15 years, less than that. But we'd been friends for a long, long time. So the most important part of this video for me is my little Ta-dar moment. Like a Ta-dar bitch moment. because I think in the Jehovah's Witness organisation, when you leave, the assumption is that you are going to fail. You're not going to be successful. You're not going to have love like you have love in a Christian congregation. You're not going to have friends like you have in a Christian congregation, which is all bullshit. All manifestly incorrect. And this is what I want to petition to the young gay Jehovah's Witnesses that might encounter this video, who are struggling with their identity, struggling with fitting in, struggling with the prospect or idea of never meeting somebody, never being allowed to fall in love with somebody, because it couldn't be further from the truth. And I'm speaking directly to you, because my Ta-dar bitch moment is the fact that I'm living proof that all of that is batshit crazy. And as I said at the top of this video, life is beautiful. I'm 43 now. I have a good job, despite leaving school with no qualifications. And I've been married to my husband for 3 years. And we live in a great apartment in southeast London. We have a dog. I literally have all the trappings of the nuclear family without the kids. Well, it's my kind of nuclear family anyway. And I really just want to say, you know, in your own time, learn to accept who you are. It's really, really not that deep. It's easy for me to say because I've been through it and I've seen it. But the most important thing is to remember that there's only one you, and there's only one life that you get. And unless you seize it, unless you allow yourself to explore and see the beauty that's in the world that you've been told all your life is about to implode, about to be destroyed and re-rendered into a beautiful paradise, it's a very small window of time that you've been given to explore all of the majesty and beauty in that world. That's kind of pretty much all I wanted to say, really. Thank you for watching, whoever you are. I'd love to connect and talk more. I'd love to do more videos like this. I think I really love this community of ex-Jehovah's Witnesses that's developing. I think it's a much needed resource for people who are either waking up or are unsure. This kind of discourse is really important to help people make more informed decisions away from the lens of the Christian congregation who are invested only in curating your thoughts and the material that you ingest. And that's what I really love about YouTube at the moment, that it's giving voice to people who have got experiences to speak to encourage others to make the steps that they need to move away from this toxic space, the toxic cult. And yeah, that's pretty much all I want to say. Please feel free to reach out. I love talking. Thanks so much for watching. Cheers, bye.